Everybody, welcome to Town Hall this week. It is a lovely, at least sunny from what I can see, day. The penultimate Friday, or the ultimate Friday before Mother's Day. So I know my wife and son are going off to, I think, learn a little bit about weaving on Sunday. Anybody else are there Mother's Day plans in your family or amongst yourselves? Anybody got anything interesting going on this week or this weekend for Mother's Day?
Like my household's primary Mother's Day activities will be next weekend. Kids have dance performances and voice recitals and stuff. So the grandmas will be, or grandmothers will be in town and attending that stuff. So I have to try and take care of my wife a little bit this weekend and then more activities next weekend.
Well, those kinds of things for grandmothers absolutely count as a Mother's Day event, right? But I was talking to folks in our office who they like to do Mother's Day the week before, the week after, just to avoid getting gouged for lunch, if nothing else. Also, I'm going to go over to just a little bit of update. I've been on the road visiting friends, neighbors, alumni. It's been a lot of fun. Last weekend, I was in Northern California with a whole group of CMS alum. The earliest of them being a 1959 grad. I think the only 1950s grad that I've met so far in my 6 months meeting folks, but it was a lot of fun. And it was great to see people and get to know a little bit more about their experiences and things like that. We have reunions coming up in the fall. By all means, if you have the opportunity to encourage someone to hang out with us from whatever college you're in, getting together with alumni is a lot of fun and always interesting. They have remarkable stories from their time with us and since. We also hosted the Schreiber Philanthropy this week. So they have supported programs like Nursing Inspire, our care coach out in the communities, the CAC, the Child Advocacy Center Clinic. And I was also talking to them about cash for moms and babies. I testified this week for the Illinois House. And we're going to be talking about some of this kind of stuff at Health Equity Breakfast on Monday. A whole group of us there for that. It's a great opportunity to talk to our neighbors and funders about work that we do at RFU. It's an incredibly important opportunity. There's been awards week. So faculty awards, and then I visited the Student Leadership Awards this week. Noah, one of your podiatry students, winning the award for podiatry. And then I'll just a little update on budget. The budget gets finalized with the board on June 25th for that meeting. We are working our way through the last chunk to get to a flat or break-even budget. I'm starting to turn a little bit optimistic. That's never a good thing. It really does come down to enrollment questions but as we look at how some of the grants that have come in, including in podiatry, that make a big difference to the income statement. I feel like we're heading in a good direction. SREC is still meeting and there's still good work to do, but I'm starting to feel pretty good about that. So that's my update. I'm always happy to answer questions about any of this kind of stuff. Feel free to put your questions into the Q&A. But I'm really excited to have this panel from the Scholl College of Podiatric Medicine. We have with us Jack Arp, fourth year, soon to be graduating podiatry student, Christopher Connaboy, who is associate professor and director of CLEAR, Ryan Cruz, associate professor, Shawn Flanagan, associate professor and director of the Human Performance Lab, and recent winner of the 2026 Morris Parker Award. Noah Rosenblatt, the Associate Dean of Research and Associate Professor, and leading us all, Stephanie Wu, Professor and Dean of the Scholl College. So they're going to go through and talk about their work, their research work, and in podiatry and in the Scholl College. And as always, questions make this more fun and enjoyable. So by all means, put them in. Stephanie, the screen is yours.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Souza. So, in addition to serving as Dean of Scholl College, I, along with Dr. Ryan Cruz, under the mentorship of Dr. David Armstrong, am also a founding member of CLEAR. So, today, for the first few minutes, you're going to hear the story of CLEAR, where we hope to present a broad overview of the collective areas of interest for the group, including key approaches and capabilities. I'd like to start with a few key highlights of our 20 plus year history and my efforts therein, and allow most of the talk to focus on student research and the current CLEAR faculty. So I am very biased, but I'm also really proud of CLEAR's research impact and its establishment as a preeminent center of its type. We've got well over 200 publications, 90 plus awards, 260 plus abstract presentations, with not only a national but a global reach in more than 23 countries. But really, what's important is that a significant portion of the research involved our students, right? It's important to us that we mentor the next generation of podiatric researchers. And for those of us in research, there's really nothing more gratifying than to see a student's face light up, when they see their names in print as an author for the first time in a peer-reviewed publication, or finding out that their research got selected for an oral presentation at an international meeting out of thousands of entries. I'm going to brag a bit, but we boast more student publications, awards, presentations than any other podiatric medical school, and we are extremely proud of that. So CLEAR was founded in 2004 as an interdisciplinary research center with a mission of improving the health and function of the lower extremity. One of the other things we did at the time was to revamp Scholl's summer research program. We wanted to increase student participation, increase the outcome, and we were fortunate to receive NIH funding for the program under the T35 funding mechanism in 2008. I'm also proud to say that the renewal for this training grant is competitive, and we've continuously received NIH support for our student research efforts since, and that we are the only podiatric medical school in the country to receive such funding. So in a few minutes, you're going to hear from our fourth year student who has completed the program, and he's going to talk about his experience and how it has set him up for success in his podiatric medical career. So in 2011, as you can see in the middle of that tree there, I took over as the role of the director of CLEAR and the associate dean of research at Scholl College. So for the younger faculty members who are listening to this, I just kind of wanted to share that when I joined the university in 2004, I never dreamed that I would one day serve as the director of a research unit, let alone the dean of a college. It really highlights the culture of mentorship and the opportunities for growth at the university. And I am so grateful to my collaborators and those who have mentored me along the way. As CLEAR continues to expand, we recruited Dr. Noah Rosenblatt in 2015. Now, Dr. Rosenblatt, in collaboration with the research faculty at the College of Health Professions, facilitated the college's first DoD funding, and we are the first podiatric medical college to receive such funding. The study, and I don't want to steal his thunder too much, focused on developing an interprofessional intervention that involved physical therapists and psychologists to increase community participation in lower extremity amputees by targeting physical and psychological contributors to low confidence in device use. And I think if you read the Helix story, it was highlighted recently in that. Dr. Rosenblatt currently serves as the Associate Dean of Research for the college, and CLEAR continues to build on these efforts under his leadership. We hired Dr. Chris Connaboy as a director in 2022. Now, Dr. Connaboy came to us from a large research institute in Pittsburgh, and his focus is on the health of warfighters. He was actually drawn, not right, to our location next to the FHCC and the Great Lakes Naval Base, and he helped develop a really strong relationship with the Naval Health Research Center in San Diego. So, as part of his efforts to increase our presence in Great Lakes, Dr. Connaboy helped recruit Dr. Shawn Flanagan, who was his colleague at the research center in Pittsburgh. Now, Dr. Flanagan is uniquely positioned to embrace the interprofessional nature of RFU and as well as the units and unite the clinical and translational efforts with his expertise in exercise physiology as well as neuroscience. Through these efforts, Drs. Connaboy and Flanagan, in connection with the naval research and all the expertise, they were successful in obtaining a multi-million dollar DoD grant that includes investigators across multiple RFU units aimed at reducing injury in naval recruits. And I'm sure Dr. Flanagan will speak to that in a few minutes. So really in a nutshell, right, as CLEAR continues to grow, our mission to improve the health and function of the lower extremity has evolved. From the inception of CLEAR being this strong focus on diabetic foot, it really has evolved into a more holistic approach to address aspects of injury, prevention, and human performance in general. Having provided you with a sense of our history, I'd like to now pass the talk to a member of the class of 2026. So the soon to be Dr. Jog Arp, who's going to speak to you about his experience engaging in research at CLEAR.
Thank you for the introduction. But yeah, I'm just gonna kind of give you a general overview of my time in CLEAR and go over kind of what it has provided me with. So I participated in the CLEAR program under Dr. Adam Fleischer in the summer of my first year. And basically, for the study, we found that patient and surgeon expectations were not really aligning with bunion surgery. Around 10% of patients dissatisfied despite an adequate surgical correction. So quantitative methods can't really tell us why this gap exists, because it really more depends on patients' perspectives, their feelings, their ideas, and quantitative analysis doesn't really look for that. So we used qualitative methods instead through patient interviews. And this was really just, again, to capture the feelings, the concerns that patients have to ultimately improve pre-op counseling to better align patient expectations to close this gap. So that's a very general overview, and I'm not going to go too much more in depth. Fortunately, you can read much more about it. I did get to have this work published in the Journal of Foot and Ankle Surgery, which was just very awesome experience. And then I have here just a few pictures of where this research has brought me. I was able to present in Washington, D.C. at APMA through a poster, which actually won first place. Went to APHA in Atlanta, presented a poster there as presenting a poster here in North Chicago at the Summer Research Poster Session. On top of that, this also brought me out to Tampa for ACFAS, our ACFAS conference, where I was actually giving a oral presentation on this, which was a really awesome experience with a room full of professionals in podiatry, and just great experience. So now we can go on to the next slide. I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of what I gained from CLEAR and the impact it has had on me so far, and what I see it providing me with in the future. So the clinical research skill set, I gained a lot of hands-on exposure to the full clinical research process, especially into qualitative methods, which I wasn't as familiar with. This included study design, data collection, data analysis. Gave me a better understanding of how research is actually conducted and interpreted in a clinical setting. So next, scientific communication. I developed skills in presenting research through posters and at conferences with oral presentations, learned how to communicate the complex ideas into clear, ideas to my peers and attendings. And that experience really translated into just me being more confident in presenting in academic settings. Mentorship and collaboration. I worked very closely with my mentor and the research team, which taught me how to collaborate effectively and also just gave me a very strong mentorship that extended way beyond the project itself through my schooling. Um, so the impact it's had on me as a student, resident, and future practicing podiatrist, it made me a stronger residency candidate. I worked, or the research experience kind of strengthened my application just through the tangible things that I had, like the posters that I actually got to put in the attachment for my residency application, the awards that I got, the publication itself. It made just it made me more of a competitive residency applicant. So that was really great. Meaningful mentorship and references. I kind of went over this a little bit, but the relationships that I built through Clear led to very strong references and meaningful connections with leaders in the field at conferences. Played a major role in opening doors for me during the residency application process as well. Foundation and evidence-based practices. So this program really helps solidify an evidence-based approach to medicine where I'm now more intentional about using literature to guide clinical decisions, even in like clerkships and as I went through clerkships and became more confident in having my own thoughts about things, I really saw that come through. Um, and then moving forward, I see this experience directly impacting how I practice, ensuring that my decisions are grounded in current evidence and in best practices. Finally, the confidence in research and academics. Overall, I feel way more confident in my ability to initiate research projects, contribute to an academic discussion, and to continue being involved in research throughout my career. So that's kind of the basis for my participation in Clear, and I will say that the Clear program is one of the major reasons why I chose to go to Scholl College at Rosalind Franklin University, and of course, this wouldn't be possible without Dr. Rosenblatt. So he was huge help in really clearly explaining Clear and kind of driving my motivation to want to come to the school. So I'd like to pass it on to him now, and he'll tell
Hang
you.
on, before we do that, I was just going to ask you a little bit about like how did you like what of your history or what was it that attracted you to Clear and you thought, oh well, that'd be something I would like to do.
Yeah, so really when I remember first hearing about it and thinking, oh well, that's pretty cool,
Hmm.
was one of the presentations during the whole application process. My degree is in biomedical engineering
Yeah.
and already kind of in the research world, much different with cell culture and kind of and that sort of thing. But wanted to continue that. It was just one of my interests and something that I looked for. And whenever we had, I don't remember what the session was, but it was just, I think maybe just a general informational session before during the admission process when I learned about it and looked more into it. It just really caught my eye. And yeah, I mean, like I said, ultimately became one of my deciding factors. But yeah.
Well, so and now I want to actually ask you a little bit about the actual work, because I've done some qualitative
Mhm.
studies and publications. They're brutal. So, I mean, it's straight up brutal, because anybody can collect data, put a student t-test together and get a p-value. This is actual work. So I, like how did you guys go about trying to assess what the patients were thinking? And did you do interviews, focus groups? How did you guys collect the data? Then what was it like trying to do the analysis?
Yeah, it was much more of a challenge than I originally thought it would be, especially coming from a quantitative mindset. You
Yeah.
kind of have to switch gears a little bit because this work is, lower level of evidence, more hypothesis generating. It was kind of a phase one of
Yeah.
two phase study. But yeah, so we did patient interviews, patients who were scheduled to undergo hallux valgus surgery and hadn't yet undergone it. We did Zoom interviews with my principal investigator. We had a semi-structured kind of interview template that we went off of, but obviously to allow for a little wiggle room to
Yep.
more deep kind of their thoughts and feelings on things. So we would do that, get their permission to record it, and then I would transcribe everything, every sigh, every pause, how long the pause. That was a little more painstaking than I thought.
Brutal is the word, my friend. Brutal.
Brutal. Yeah, I was a little brutal. Um, but I did have a little bit more help from another student.
Yeah.
John was nice. But then, of course, after that, the coding process and coming up with the codes, and that was also, I guess, a little brutal. But um, and then coming up with the themes as well, just through our collaboration with the principal investigator, Dr. Adam Fleischer and Dr. Longacre. We brought in other PhDs, on the project as well. It was really cool, and I don't know. Yeah, it was really awesome to learn a different mindset of the whole research world. So
Yeah, I mean, like there are questions that you can't answer any other way. You're never going to justify having a drug go on the market with qualitative analysis, but there are a whole bunch of answers you cannot get just with quantitative analysis, and it is a huge amount of work. I don't think people generally have a sense of how much work it is to do a qualitative study. But and so what's next for you, Jack?
So next, graduation, and then going off
Woohoo!
Fairfax for residency at Innova. So it's actually where Dean Wu went. So
All right.
kind of fun, but that's the next move.
That's next. All right. Well, sorry, I think I stepped on Dr. Rosenblatt. Is that right?
No problem. Piggybacking off of what you and I think maybe Jack noted this is in terms of this being an initial step, right? This project was and continues ongoing work. I don't know if Dr. Fleischer's in the audience and wants to speak about that later, but next year students utilize this evidence to try and develop a survey that can actually be patient forward focused to identify these perceptions and viewpoints for the clinician to know going in and kind of set expectations realistically to help optimize outcomes for those patients. So, this was just one step in the process. I also, just before we close the book on kind of the student end of things, want to mention that as Dr. Wu mentioned, this is I believe we're going into our 18th consecutive summer of the research program. We are constantly looking for mentors that can mentor our students. So if you have any interest in taking on a Scholl student next summer, particularly if you have any research that covers topics related to diabetes or diabetes complications, since this is funded through the NIDDK, feel free to reach out. We'd love to find new opportunities for our students. But I want to now kind of flip the talk to focusing on some of the faculty work that goes on. Dr. Wu spoke earlier, which she didn't necessarily touch on, is the large body of work that she's done through that time since she started at Scholl, but continues today within the areas of wound healing with a large focus on clinical trials. And she's been involved in well over 60 trials looking at different modalities for wound healing, as well as other outcomes related to foot health and function. And her work, as well as the work of each of the folks that you'll hear about today, myself, I'll speak to my broad areas of falls and with an emphasis on outcomes for amputees, and pass it to Dr. Cruz, Flanagan, and Connaboy. We'll each talk about our focuses, although all kind of specific in nature, right? They all fall under the larger umbrella and the mission that Dr. Wu mentioned that CLEAR seeks to attain is overall to improve the health and function of the lower extremity. And so where does my work fall within that? So my particular research interest, it falls within broadly trying to understand physical and psychological constraints to locomotor stability and reactive balance. And inherent to those two particular domains, The broader goal of this work is to try to promote mobility, prevent mobility disability, improve balance, and really end goal is doing all that by preventing falls. I tend to focus on patient populations at higher risk of falling, as well as looking at how to maintain mobility in healthy old adults as we age. With regards to those patient populations of interest, as one of them being prosthetic users, amputees do fall at considerably higher rates. And so my interest is in trying to prevent those falls, but more broadly, it tries to address a major gap within the research for that population related to understanding outcomes-based research. Jack alluded to this a little bit in his talk. I forget what he said, but it resonated in terms of evidence-based practice and the importance of evidence-based research for clinical practice with regards to prosthetic prescription and guiding what may work best for what patient. The field is very limited, so a lot of my work aims to try to help provide that evidence for the field. Here you see two videos related to some of these broad efforts. On the left is a study that we did looking at how older adults coordinate motion of the lower extremities to complete a goal-directed task related to placement of the foot while walking, which is critical for balance. And on the right is one of our videos from an assessment in one of our outcome studies for amputees performing what we call the narrow beam walking test. I mentioned already, right, some of the populations that tend to be at increased risk of falling, dealing with healthy adults, dealing with a lot of work in amputees, both major amputees, including above the knee and below the knee, as well as an interest in some of the comorbidities that are associated with amputation and increased mobility disability and fall risk, obesity and diabetes being two of the main ones. We utilize a number of different methodologies to address these questions, some of which are very standard in practice. These include motion capture cameras and force plates to analyze motion and the forces producing that motion. And then we also add to that a level that really helps me to evaluate that aspect of reactive balance control, help people respond when they lose their balance in a very controlled fashion. We apply postural perturbations, one of which you see here is providing a perturbation that mimics tripping. And then, so you can see a hidden tripping device shows up and using those cameras to track the movement. You see that as those colored lines basically connecting all these points, and the force plates are those blue squares, and you see an orange vector pointing out of the ground. Basically, that would be, for example, a study where we were looking at how obesity affects this behavior. A more recent approach that we use can be seen in this video. This was a study for prosthetic users where rather than looking at fore-aft balance, particularly in response to tripping, we were looking at medial lateral side-to-side perturbations, in this case using what we call a waist pull paradigm. And this study was broadly trying to understand how the function of the muscles in the hip in above knee amputees may change following amputation, and how that relates to this stepping ability in these falling tasks. And then on the right there is just one of the many outcoming papers from one of those outcome-based studies looking at another, again, above the knee amputees, evaluating these, what we call adjustable prosthetic sockets, which address a very specific problem faced by this population. These sockets came to the market right before COVID. There was a big push of them to address a particular issue. All of the manufacturers saying, this is the best new thing, it fixes X, Y, and Z, none of them having any evidence to support that. So that was really was one of the reasons that this work got funded, because this work, we really needed the evidence to say what these things were actually capable of doing.
So did they work or not?
Well,
Or both.
So what they're trying to accomplish, one of the key problems for amputees is that the volume of the residual limb constantly fluctuates throughout the day. You know, you can imagine if you stand on your feet all day, as an analogy, without an amputation, your feet swell, right? So there's for the amputee, the way if the volume of the limb changes, then you can't use the device. It's static in nature. It's made to address a certain limb size. So they have to put on socks or take off socks. These, as you can see in the picture, are a bunch of, there's many different technologies that basically let you ratchet yourself or make adjustments on the fly. In terms of do they work to address that, really our interest, it's interesting because we weren't so much looking at the extent to which people use these to adjust volume, as opposed to we were looking at, do they use them at all? Do they improve quality here? See here, quality of life was the primary outcome. As expected, there is no one size fits all solution. Each of these have some benefits depending on the outcome that you're looking at. With regards to comfort, they did not all, we compared them to the static type of, the one that doesn't adjust, the gold standard. And some of them, depending on the condition you're looking at, may be more beneficial. For example, for lower functioning patients, some of these ones that didn't go up as high on the leg. So the lower functioning patients tend to do more sitting than walking. For them, seating comfort was particularly important rather than adjustability, for example. So for them, the ones that made them more comfortable while seated were seen as more beneficial. So all of that to say, just like any practice, it's individualized. Ultimately, after 5+ years and multi-million dollars of study, we basically came to the conclusion that this is a tool in the bucket for prosthetists to be aware of, as long as they know what that tool can be used for.
Yeah, for people who don't know, right, below the knee amputations are much easier to manage for people in terms of the prosthesis than above the knee. There's just a huge range, more options, more stability, more everything. So it is always a difficult thing having an above the knee amputation.
Yeah, I've heard it described as basically like a stick in a bowl of jelly is like how they have to try and control their femur inside that sock.
Yeah, fascinating. All right. So I'll get back to the T35 if we have as time. But I want to actually, let's get through the rest of the folks and we'll come back to the T35 because people may not know what that is or why that's so impressive to have one. So who's next?
That'd be me.
All right.
So I'm going to circle back to a little bit about what Dr. Wu was talking about as far as diabetic foot complications and some of the research we do in the center tied to that. My background's in kinesiology or movement science. So I usually talk about my research being at kind of the intersection between physical activity and lower limb health, or like the street sign kind of shows you there in the image. And so in particular, I do a lot of work with people with diabetes. And one of the most common complications tied to diabetes in lower extremities is the development of diabetic peripheral neuropathy, or a loss of function in the nerves in the foot and the leg. And what this allows for is essentially people lose protective sensation. And so we make this a little bit of an analogy similar to wearing a hole in the bottom of a sock. When you can't feel actually your foot, you can actually literally wear a hole in the bottom of your foot, and you develop these diabetic foot ulcers. And so when we start thinking about diabetic foot ulcers, whether it's treating active ones or preventing them, a really key concept is offloading. And so when we talk about offloading, it's trying to kind of redirect physical trauma away from either wounds or areas that are prone to wound in the future. So in the video, you can see essentially a side-by-side comparison of standard video of a foot taking a step. And then the more kind of colorful image shows the pressures on the bottom of the foot throughout that. So we're going to see here the first metatarsal taking on a bunch of stress, and then it's going to transition kind of out to the big toe later in the step. So with each step, we put a tremendous amount of load on the foot, and that can be highly isolated or it can be spread across the foot more evenly. So again, with concept of offloading, we're trying to optimize how the foot and lower extremity takes on stress. So one of the ways we can try and offload or control loading the foot is with cast walkers. So the woman in the image here, I'm going to call Fanny, is wearing a cast walker there. And if you want to advance the image there, Noah. So as we start thinking about different ways to take the load off Fanny, there's a couple of different offloading approaches that one could pursue. So on the conservative front, that's the most common approach to offloading. And within that, we have two subcategories. One would be non-removable offloading. So that involves either an actual cast or a cast walker that has been rendered hard to take off. So some of these actually have a lock. So the provider can actually lock the patient in, put it back in their white coat and say, I'll see you next week. And then in addition to those non-removable options, we have the removable features, which are much more common for a whole host of reasons. But adherence is a big challenge with that, and that patients tend not to wear them very often. There's a whole host of reasons why patients don't wear them. It's understandable why it's tough for them to do that. And so we definitely do a lot of research just looking at adherence specifically. And then in addition to conservative modalities, there's also surgical approaches to offloading. So you can make changes to the bony architecture or some of the soft tissue to change the mechanics of how someone walks, and again, how the foot takes on load. So as far as current offloading related studies in diabetic foot ulcers, we have a couple grants for active research studies, one from NIH and another one from the American College of Foot and Ankle Surgeons. As you might guess, the one from the American College of Foot and Ankle Surgeons is tied to surgical offloading, and then NIH grants tied to some of these conservative modalities. One of the big questions at the end of the day when we start assessing offloading interventions is actually how well they're offloading the foot. What are they doing mechanically? So this slide shows just a little bit mechanistically about how we assess the functionality of some of these devices and really try and quantify what their impact is. So if we start on the box on the left, that shows a pretty typical looking diabetic foot ulcer in the ball of foot there. And then there's two arrows leading to two different sets of essentially footprints. And so if we follow the upper arrow, that shows what the loading of the foot looks like, essentially when that person with that wound is walking barefoot. And so we can see a ton of stress right below the wound, which would definitely be problematic for allowing that wound to heal. And then that lower green arrow shows another trace of that same person walking with a cast walker on, and we can see a great reduction in the stress at the side of the wound, which is going to allow that wound a better opportunity to heal by protecting it while they're weight bearing. And so we do those assessments typically in the clinic or the gait lab. And so that gives us an idea of stress per event or cycle. But then the big question is what happens once these people leave the clinic? What are they doing day in, day out? And so we use some pretty sophisticated activity monitors to quantify activity over a period of days, weeks, or even ultimately months. And so the second box here shows one of those activity monitors being placed on an individual's thigh. That goes on with a waterproof dressing so they can bathe with it. They don't have to charge it. They don't have to download it. It's kind of like the old infomercials. You set it and forget it. And so it's just off and running, collecting data. And then what we often do is pair the monitor on the participant with a monitor on their offloading device. And by having those two sensors time synchronized, we can actually quantify adherence. So we know not only when they're up and walking, when they're standing, but are they up and walking with their boot on or is that off? And so when we combine the data from those two systems, we essentially have these four components of foot stress. So we know not only how much stress they're placing while walking without the device and how much stress they're placing while standing without the device, but also we're quantifying how many steps they take per day with their device on and how much time they spend standing with their device on. And so if you kind of merge those four individual components, that gets at that final value in the third box there, that daily cumulative stress. And so we tend to quantify it at a day level, but we can also say per week, per month, per hour. We can get as granular as we want. And so we've seen some interesting things when we do get more granular on the time scale as far as what, for example, patients do immediately prior to a visit at the clinic, where sometimes they're not wearing it up until about 30 minutes before the visit. So that's a little bit of kind of understanding of some of the methodology we use and some of the things we're doing in that offloading space. But I'm formally going to pass it off to our next speaker here, Dr. Flanagan, who's also going to talk about physical activity, but from certainly a different lens.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Yeah, so again, pleasure to be here. And we're up to all kinds of no good. But what I want to focus on is a project that builds upon work that we did at the University of Pittsburgh. And it represents a really interesting collaborative opportunity. It's a foot in the door for RFU, and it is something that we just received notification of funding for from the DoD. And so,
Congrats.
Thank you much. Thank you much. Yeah. So what we're focusing on is bone stress injury, and bone stress injuries are endemic in the military. Think about military recruits. They could be in the Navy, could be in the Army, could be in the Marines, any of the branches of the military. They begin with some kind of basic military training program. It's usually 8 to 10 weeks long. And during that program, the recruits are doing exhaustive and continuous physical activity, right? And no matter how conditioned they are when they join the military, it's almost certainly a large increase in physical activity, especially with load carriage. And because of that, and of course, larger historical trends in physical inactivity and fitness, which is a different issue, we see bone stress injuries towards the middle or end of the basic military training program. And the issue with these injuries, whether they're just bone stress injuries or complete fractures, the prognosis is pretty bad. Many of these individuals wind up being discharged. They wind up being on disability, and their careers basically end before they begin. Now, there are a number of non-invasive imaging technologies that can detect bone stress injuries, but they are not fieldable. They're cost prohibitive and they're time prohibitive. Things like MRI, bone scans. And so what we really need are non-invasive biomarkers that can be obtained at scale in field settings, and it can be used to give us something of a green, amber, or red light for the likely presence of a bone stress injury when it's mild and it can be intervened on. And so what we want to do in this project, in a nutshell, is map skeletal health on an unprecedented scale. We want to understand the molecular underpinnings of the largest beneficial adaptations in bone formation during basic combat training. We want to understand why some people don't experience any improvement in adaptive bone formation. And we want to be able to understand and detect bone stress injuries, which are not necessarily the same as negative or no adaptive responses. And the longer term goal of the effort is to translate what we learn, be it a protein, two proteins, a small panel of proteins, into a fieldable test that can identify individuals at risk before severe bone stress injury occurs. And again, what you're seeing on the right here is just a mechanistic overview of the bone remodeling process. Most of the folks who do basic military training experience improvements in bone mineral density, improvements in adaptive bone formation. We want to better understand that, and we also want to understand why some people experience pathological remodeling and ultimately reductions in bone stiffness and injury. And so this work is based on work that we had done at the University of Pittsburgh. And at Pitt, we spent most of our time developing and validating the procedures and protocols needed to obtain, process, preserve, and analyze urine with high fidelity, sensitivity, and consistency. And people ask, well, why urine? It isn't something that I would say that I'm passionate about personally, but what I would say is this, right? Urine, and no judgment. What I would say is that
Well,
urine,
if you didn't have urine, you would be passionately concerned with it. I can promise you that.
and that's fair enough, right? These things don't pop up until they pop up, right? So the thing with urine is it's naturally integrative. Right? Around 30% of the contents of urine comes from plasma. It isn't just junk, from the kidneys, from the ureter, from the reproductive tract. You can pick up proteins from every major organ and physiological system in the body in urine. Okay, that's the first thing. The second is you're doing it every day, whether you're in a study or not. Okay, and abundance is never an issue. That's another big factor. Practically speaking, urine has been stored in the bladder before it's excreted for some time at body temperature. So the proteins that are going to degrade have largely degraded. What we tend to pick up is more stable. I wouldn't necessarily say it's easier to process than plasma. It introduces other issues. But the fact of the matter is, in terms of scalability and something that can be done in the field, urine is advantageous. And so what we learned from our previous optimization and methodological experiments is that with newer mass spectrometry-based proteomics techniques, we can detect proteins that span roughly 6 orders of magnitude. which is absolutely insane. It's modern marvels. What that means is that we can detect proteins that are very abundant, and we can detect proteins that exist at very, very small quantities and concentrations in the urine, and we can detect everything between, right? And that was a fundamental limitation for proteomics techniques for a long time. The technique, when it's optimized, allows us to detect well over 10,000 peptides with an enormous amount of variability. As you can see in this middle volcano plot in the top row here, we detect proteins that, again, relate to a ton of different biological processes, everything from skin development, immune function, tissue regeneration, nutrient level response and ossification, to excretion, pH responses, as you would expect given that it's urine, responses to estrogen and remodeling for collagen, muscle, and even axonal injury, right? So once again, nervous system specific proteins. What we discovered in the past work is that the proteins that seem to differentiate recruits who were participating in basic Army combat training, who experienced the biggest improvements in adaptive bone formation from basically no improvement or even negative changes. We're not necessarily talking about injury, but we're talking about the absence of positive adaptive changes in bone formation. Two proteins, and these proteins are both related to adaptive immunity. Now, that wasn't what we hypothesized. We thought it would be collagen turnover products, maybe a marker specific to bone physiology and bone formation or resorption. But it makes sense, right? Much of the immune system originates in bone, right? The two are inextricably linked, and they always have been. And so perhaps it isn't surprising that the immune system is what winds up being really predictive and reflective of changes in adaptive bone formation. And so the way that we detect adaptive bone formation is another feature of this project that makes it special, right? Similar to muscle, similar to the brain, similar to pretty much every other tissue in your body, we're constantly adapting. We're adapting to the things we do, the things we don't do, the environments we live in, our experiences, disease, and everything in between. Bone adaptations occur on a relatively slower time scale, but more importantly, the technologies that we use to detect those adaptations traditionally lack the sensitivity to do so on an order of less than really maybe half a year, a quarter, numerous months. And that's where high resolution peripheral quantitative computed tomography comes into play. So this is basically a fancy CT technology. What's special about it is that it provides resolution on the order of tens of microns. And so with this and some fancy computational techniques, we're able to recreate and reconstruct the trabecular matrix and measure changes in bone volume and microarchitecture and gain sensitivity that gives us the ability to detect bone adaptations on the order of weeks. And that is critical because the bone stress injuries occur on the order of weeks. Otherwise, this wouldn't be possible. And so if you look at changes in trabecular bone volume to total volume content, that's what I circled here in orange on the right panel. If you look at individuals who experience the biggest improvements in TB-BV-TV, and then you look at individuals who are in the middle and the lower tertiles, the individuals in the middle and the lower tertiles are much more likely to experience bone stress injuries, right? So this imaging modality, it isn't just good at detecting adaptive changes in bone formation, but what we see with this technology in terms of longitudinal changes is also strongly associated with bone stress injuries. And the data that you're looking at here comes from an N of about 2,000 longitudinal, obtained from the Basic Army Combat Training Program as a part of the Army study, which the United States Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine ran, and we had the opportunity to work with them on that project. And so with this project, what we're going to do is pull in about 1,000 people, probably a little bit more, but we will collect urine, the high-res PQCT, body composition DEXA scans, and risk factors before they begin the future sailors physical fitness program. Right afterwards, right before they begin basic military training, and then either at the end of basic military training or when they report for a bone stress injury, which we'll confirm with magnetic resonance imaging in collaboration with the folks at the Lovell Healthcare facility.
Great.
It's a really interesting study because we're going to use the newest framework for the validation of clinical proteomics biomarkers, and that would involve machine learning. So we have the longitudinal prospective cohort, we have the causality there, we have pre and post, and what we'll do is we'll also pull in 100 individuals who experience bone stress injuries during basic military training, not longitudinal. 100 people though, and we'll use those individuals, as you can see in the bottom left panel, as a test cohort to validate the biomarker matrix that we've discovered and validated in the longitudinal cohorts. And the big kind of point here is that this will allow us to rapidly transition our results from the discovery proteomic stage to clinical assay development, right? Because we want to be able to take what we found and we want to be able to do targeted assay and clinical assay development so that we can develop a stick that you can pee on or dip into a jar, and again, get the green light, amber light, red light. Hey, we need to look at your vitamin D status. We need to look at your nutrition. We need to look at your training load. We need to look at whatever other risk factors we might be able to intervene on so that we can avoid a complete femoral neck stress fracture, right? Or a more severe stress fracture, and which is a career ending and extremely expensive injury. And the last point that I would make is that, again, as I said at the beginning, this is a historic opportunity. The Naval Station Great Lakes base trains all of the Navy's incoming recruits. It is the only branch of the military that is structured this way. It sees about 45,000 recruits a year. The others are distributed across the United States. They're all here. And they're also the least studied population in the entire military. And that's understandable. It's because they're not there to participate in research. They're there to train for success as midshipmen. But if we can get our foot in the door, which we now have, and we can demonstrate that A, we're friends, B, we're unobtrusive, and C, we can help them answer important questions and problems, there is an immense opportunity to build ancillary studies, supplementary studies, and additional work on a collaborative basis for the benefit of service members, veterans, and the general populace. Because remember, the military is so large. If it's a problem in the military, it's a public health problem, right? It's a problem for everyone else.
We have a couple of questions, but I want to make sure that we have some time for Dr. Connaboy as well. So maybe we'll turn to Dr. Connaboy, and then I'll go to the questions and we'll do those as well. So Dr. Connaboy, could you?
Hi there. I'll quickly try and tie this all up and wrap it up in a nice, neat bow for everybody. So, and the way in which we do this is, as you can see from the expertise here, it's eclectic. You've got biomechanics, you've got neurobehavioral, you've got neuroscience, you've got physiology, you've got motor control, wound healing. So you've got a diverse nature of intellectual expertise and approaches to understanding and viewing the world. What we're trying to do together is build this integrative approach here in CLEAR. So the traditional model has been a kind of a top down, as you can see on the kind of the middle portion, the left hand image on the panel there, a conventional multi-level model, which has basically looked at this kind of univariate approach, which is looked as things in isolation. We look at a measure and how it relates to the phenomena of interest. And typically it's been this top-down approach where we understand it as the ones above it have influence on the ones below it, and so on. More recently, we have the systems approach, kind of systems health approach, which kind of looks to see the integration kind of up and down in relation to elements from the cellular up through to experiential and so on and so forth, and see those a more integrated approach. However, we're really trying to look at this using a dynamical systems perspective, which looks at the synergistic relationships and the evolution over time. So it moves beyond kind of policy, it moves beyond the procedures that we use. It's about a paradigm, a lens, if you will, through which we view the problems that we seek to address. And this has far-reaching consequences in terms of the way in which we approach the problems at hand, the stakeholders we work with, and how we partner with them in order to address the real-world questions that they have, especially within the warfighter community. Whilst myself and Dr. Flanagan have had kind of extensive experience within that warfighter community, all the work that we do actually naturally pivots to the kind of wider societal and the kind of the broader health aspects as well. So we often pivot the same work, once identifying in this warfighter population, to the broader health service and community. So I'll wrap it up there to give us time.
That's great. Well, you can just imagine, I mean, like I'm used to, as an internist, having people come in with rhabdomyolysis or other things from exercise and things like that, and you get an x-ray and you can't figure out what's going on, and their bone alpha is high because there's a lot of remodeling going on, and you can't tell whether that's just normal or what's going on. So I absolutely understand how in an emergency room or on a football, well, you're probably not going to collect urine on a football field, but just off the football field, you might. So, but we have a couple of questions or comments that I want to make sure that we give you guys a chance to respond to. Lisa Hopp, Dean Hopp, this is so interesting, particularly the qualitative research you're doing. It is intense when it comes to data analysis, to be sure. I just want to comment that if anyone is interested in learning more about systematic reviews of qualitative research using meta aggregation, our JBI Center offers training in this methodology as well as quant and meta-analysis. And that Dr. Muhammad Khan on acupressure, regular gentle massage can improve local blood flow and has been shown to reduce symptoms of diabetic peripheral neuropathy, a major risk factor for ulcers and acupuncture. Some clinical studies suggest acupuncture may improve nerve conduction velocity and increase temperature in the soles of the feet, which helps in preventing diabetic foot disease. Any research or thoughts about these from you all?
General, when we look at the research studies, there are a few meta-analyses that suggest perhaps acupuncture can help, and it may serve as an adjunct. So really, when it comes to diabetes, nothing's going to beat having hemoglobin A1C that is low, making sure that they have the progress, right? So it may help support as an adjunct, but I don't really think there's any modalities that's really going to be the end all be all. And also, it really depends on the patient population. There's certain folks whose neuropathy is so far gone.
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but it doesn't really matter what you do to it. You're not going to reverse it. Your hemoglobin A1C can go down to 5.8, and you're not going to reverse the neuropathy. So catching patients at early on, making sure that they have good glycemic control and inspect their feet every day, perhaps in conjunction with some of the other modalities, say physical therapy, acupuncture, may or actually advocated by the American Diabetes Association to help with peripheral neuropathy.
Yeah, and pressure wounds are a complicated thing, right? You can hit your thumb with a hammer and not break the skin, but just the weight of essentially a piece of paper will cause an erosion over time, which can take you out actually if when they get infected. So no, I want to give you a chance. We only have a minute left. What is a T35? Why and what do you do in it?
Yeah, so the T35 is one of the training mechanisms through the NIH, and this one is specifically geared towards providing podiatric students opportunity to engage in basic biomedical research training. As alluded to, right, that's a critical aspect of their careers. And as far in terms of the representation of podiatric medicine within biomedical research and biomedical sciences, it's highly underrepresented. Although we don't use that word for our T35 because we get in trouble. And so the goal of the program is literally to provide them with the basic training as a piggyback to other opportunities at Scholl or thereafter. And so as part of the program, they have 8 weeks of dedicated research time within a laboratory setting. They've got no classwork to keep them busy, so only research. And then that's complemented by required content as it relates to responsible conduct of research and other important ideas to know about as you pursue research.
That's great. Susanna Calkins says, great conversation. Love hearing from our students about how much they learn from our amazing faculty. And indeed, I want to thank you all for being with us today. Thank you to Jack Arp, Christopher Connaboy, Ryan Cruz, Shawn Flanagan, Noah Rosenblatt, and Stephanie Wu for being on the panel today. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you for all you do to support our faculty, our staff, and our students. It is the work of people like you that make the university such a special place to be. It is Friday. I hope you get to have a weekend. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.